Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of developer Lam Jam's turn-based title, Tower of Shades. Find out if I think it deserves some shade, or if I found the experience elevating. My editor is going to kill me for these puns one day. Ahem. A somber and sinister miasma stretches out across the horizon, spanning out in all directions from the top of the ominous tower. Before you, a menacing shadow looms up, threatening to bring your long journey to an end. Because, you're starting at the end. Tower of Shades is a quirky title that puts players at the end of their heroic journey, with the narrative being more focused on the player and their struggle with seemingly insurmountable odds. That's not to say that there isn't a narrative to follow for the heroine of the game, but you don't actually get to discover those details until close to its climax. Whilst I did find it to be a legitimately interesting piece of storytelling, the fact that it comes in the form of a fairly lengthy cutscene, especially when compared to the overall length of Tower of Shade, was a bit peculiar to me. Especially when the gameplay itself can feel fairly iterative. But then, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. For those astute watchers, you might have noticed I called Tower of Shades turn-based and then trailed off, and that's because it's not really a role-playing game. Certainly it mimics the format, but for those expecting a full-fledged JRPG, this title is anything but. Instead, it provides players with a single battle with a pre-assembled set of abilities and items at their disposal to mortally battle their nemesis with. So, it plays out akin to a puzzle of sorts, only you're gonna lose. What's more, after your initial loss, you're reduced to a bare-bones ensemble of your initial kit, the likes of which you gradually recover over the course of throwing yourself at the boss over and over again. In a sense, it actually feels fairly grindy, and the boss itself doesn't actually acquire any major dramatic changes between your rematches to shake things up. In fact, the two moments where the game seems to imply that there's going to be a changed up second or third phase, it defers instead to storytelling, rather than any sort of significant gameplay change. And even then, it manages to make that feel repetitive by the end of your playthrough. Still, I don't have any qualms with the soundtrack, as it does manage to harken back to fond memories of playing RPGs on the SNES. In fact, the animations have a similar vibe, though that's perhaps because it leans heavily on the completely over-the-top attack animations for the protagonist, at least. Sure, your basic attack's weak sauce, but you have a completely overblown trio of summons to lean on, and what's more, your elemental attacks actually have different animations depending on if the boss is currently weak, strong, or even neutral to them, which is rather neat. And the overall strength of the visual storytelling in the penultimate cutscene was actually quite surprising. Like, I genuinely cringed in sympathy for the main character at a certain point. But, yeah. That said, that brings us to the finale, and whilst you may be thinking this review is a bit short, that's actually fairly intentional, if only because Tower of Shades took me around 38 or so minutes to clear. And it struck me as weird if I made a review that ended up being as long as its final cutscene. That's not to say I minded the game, it was a genuinely interesting narrative focused on the interaction between a game and its player, as well as the overarching theme of perseverance in the face of adversity. That said, the fact that the heroine's backstory gets introduced in such a dense and late-game fashion can be a little bit jarring, and I somewhat wish it had been broken up a little bit. And whilst I never became exhausted by the main gameplay loop, it was definitely frustrating to find myself just waiting to die occasionally because I didn't have the tools necessary to proceed, because I hadn't died enough yet. Because of how much I ended up seeing the fight over and over again, especially in the face of a certain storytelling twist that kicks in right before the final cutscene, I ended up more or less going through the motions by the time I reached the climax. Perhaps that's why I ultimately feel the game is a fumble. There's some good ideas, and if you need something to tide you over for an afternoon, or are curious to see a game tackle ideas that resonate surprisingly well with mental health issues, despite my gripings, they did resonate with me. Tower of Shades may fit the bill, but I view this title as less of a game and more of an interactive presentation. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner or the description so you can be part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a Ko-fi running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor, and to make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and the banner for demo links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.